Are you familiar with the name Darrell Niles? He's a 17-year-old, well, he was a 17-year-old Keenan High School student and basketball player in 2010. He's now dead. Before I get into his story, I want to preface by saying a couple things. I own a gun. I am waiting for my concealed weapon permit to come to me from the state. I work part-time at a gun store. Our show, Another Voice with Eric and Friend, is in part sponsored by a gun show. I believe in the Second Amendment. I believe you and I have the right to defend ourselves, and if the situation arises, even with deadly force. And I also believe that Circuit Court Judge Maddie Murphy was absolutely wrong this week when he told Shannon Scott, that he didn't have to face any charges for the death of Darrell Niles, who he shot, who Shannon Scott shot Darrell Niles. And he's not going to face any charges because of the stand your ground law, unless, of course, the Supreme Court overrules it. But let's go back to discuss this story, what actually happened. In 2010, Shannon Scott's 15-year-old daughter was at a nightclub after midnight, and she called her dad scared. She was worried. She said that she was on her way home, and there were some women thugs following her in a car. Obviously, Mr. Scott was concerned. Any father would be. I have daughters. I would be concerned. When his daughter pulled into to his property, he got them and directed the daughter and friends to go into the house and lay down on the floor in the kitchen. Now, I don't know where on his property he was, but he was not, at that point, in the front yard. After getting his daughter and friends settled, he came out either on the stoop or on the front lawn with his .380 pistol, at which time 2 vehicles drove by or drove and turned into his driveway. It's a little murky here, but they drove in that area. And what is contradictory right now is there are reports that gunshot was fired from those vehicles toward Mr. Scott and his home. That's being challenged by the Fifth Circuit Solicitor Dan Johnson. And at that point, Mr. Scott opened fire. But he didn't fire on either of the vehicles that were alleged to have been following his daughter and that were alleged to have had gunfire come from. He fired at a third vehicle, driven by Mr. Darrell Niles, 17-year-old young man. There are stories that say the reason Mr. Niles was even in that area is he was trying to make certain that Mr. Scott's daughter got home. We don't know if that's true or not, and Mr. Niles can't tell us because he's dead. Mr. Scott feels terrible that Darrell Niles is dead. He never intended to kill Darrell Niles, but he did kill him anyway. His defense, his attorney being State Representative Todd Rutherford, who, interestingly enough, is one of the authors of South Carolina's Stand Your Ground law. He represented Mr. Scott and pushed the fact that Mr. Scott should not be charged, should not be prosecuted, nothing should happen to him based on the Stand Your Ground law, that Mr. Scott was in threat for his life and his family, and he defended himself. It is tragic that an innocent bystander was killed, but nonetheless, the Stand Your Ground law covers it. And Circuit Court Judge Maddie Murphy agreed. This is outrageous. Let me just go through some of this aspects of this story. First of all, I'd like to know why a 15-year-old person was in a nightclub. Now, that doesn't mean that bad things should have happened to her, but I'm trying to figure out why that 15-year-old's there. And I would like to ask Mr. Scott, why was your daughter, 15-year-old daughter, in the nightclub? But that's neither here nor there. I'd like to know from Mr. Scott, did you have a conversation with your daughter as to why she was being followed by these, quote, women thugs in the first place? I don't know. It never came out in the stories that I've read. But let's get down to the brass tacks of what happened. The attorney said that he had the right to defend himself. He shouldn't have to retreat into his castle because he was threatened. Now let's look at that for a minute. According to how the thing worked, Mr. Scott was near his castle. He was directing his daughter and friends in the castle to protect them. And there was, at that moment, no threat directly to him. Now, there was talk of cars following. We don't know. I don't know how Mr. Scott was aware that they might be shooting at him, but at that point, Mr. Scott could have simply gone inside and called the police. Now, I know why you shouldn't have to wait for the police. I didn't say he couldn't defend himself if they came and attacked him in his castle where we're supposed to be safe. But let's go above that. The 4 basic rules for gunfire safety, for firearm safety are: number 1, always treat every gun as a loaded weapon. Number 2, never keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. Number 3, don't ever point your firearm at anything you're not willing to destroy. And finally, number 4, know your target and what's beyond it. Mr. Scott broke rule number 4 because he never intended to kill Darrell Niles. He shot the wrong person, if he should have shot anybody. Now, Representative Rutherford, in his defense, said, look, someone like Shannon Scott, now he didn't explain what it was like, but someone like him, and put in this situation of a life and death, can't be expected to shoot straight always because they're not put in life and death situations. What? If you are going to take a firearm in your hand to defend yourself, it is incumbent on you to be practice with that firearm, to use that firearm in sensible and responsible ways. Let me give you an example. There was a mall shooting out in Portland last year. A man was using a rifle and shooting people, and there was a CWP holder in the building. He got himself behind a pillar. He got his firearm out. He had a bead on the shooter, but he didn't shoot. You know why? Because he saw movement out of the corner of his eye behind the shooter. He wasn't certain of what was beyond his target. This death of an innocent young man should never have happened, and Mr. Shannon Scott holds responsibility for that. Now, do I think he should have been charged with murder? Of course not. Negligent homicide, I don't know, manslaughter. I don't know what charge should have been there. But this was the failure of an individual to act responsibly with his firearm. First of all, he didn't need to be on the front lawn with his firearm. Now, you might disagree with me, but there was no immediate threat. Go in the house. Watch the situation. Call the phone. Call the cops. He caused the situation. He did not need to be on that lawn. And he took the life of somebody who, at worst, was not involved at all, and at best, was actually looking out for the interest of his daughter. This is a terrible decision by this circuit court judge, and it's going to give fodder to people who say, oh, gun people are all crazy and you shouldn't be able to use a firearm. That's baloney, because responsible gun owners, like that CWP holder in the Portland mall shooting, many of us are responsible. This man was not, and he needs to pay the price for that. Now, we have one hope in South Carolina. This case is being appealed up to the state Supreme Court. Well, we have two hopes. The first is that the Supreme Court gets it right and says, no, I'm sorry, you're not immune from prosecution. You are going to have a trial, and we're going to let a jury of your peers decide whether you are guilty of something. Stand your ground should not mean you never get a review by your peers. But our second thing is we have the voice to tell our representatives and senators that while I believe you have the right to defend yourself with deadly force, I also believe that you have a responsibility, if you're going to take a weapon in your hand that can provide lethal force against somebody, that you need to be held responsible for it. So I urge you to contact your representatives and senators and demand that they take a second look and a third look at how our Stand Your Ground law is written and make it clear so that this doesn't happen. All right, folks, we may talk about this more on Another Voice with Eric and Friends. You can find that at canIGetAWordIn.com. Our new podcasts go up usually on Monday evening. You can also go to Facebook at Another Voice with Eric and Friends and talk to us there. And I would love to hear. I'd love to hear. Put comments here below on the video where the comments are, or on our Facebook, or any of the other places. And I just want to remind you, Monday the 14th, the 2013 Who Cares food drive starts. And we'll have on the website and on the Facebook places where you can drop off food. This is to help the hungry across Greenville County, and hopefully, if you're watching this outside of Greenville, across our country. All right, until we talk again, get out in your community and make a difference.